What's going on?
Father Losky, Matrimony and Holy Orders, take one.
Oh, John.
I'm not responsible.
All right, well, let's start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for calling us to holiness, to be one with you as you have desired to be one with us. As we contemplate the mysteries of matrimony and holy orders tonight, we ask that you bless all of us in this room and fulfill in us the grace that you've already given. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so this is the last series, or the last talk in this year's series on the seven sacraments. We've kind of traversed through the sacraments of initiation, baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, went through the two sacraments of healing, reconciliation, and anointing of the sick. And now tonight, we're going to cram into one evening the sacraments of holy matrimony and holy orders. I'm kind of surprised that it wasn't done out in 2 nights, but we follow the curriculum that the families are doing in Family Faith Formation, and they've got both sacraments of vocation in one. So we'll do our best. But one of the things that I think is complementary in the two of them is that both of them really proclaim the nuptial mystery. Both holy matrimony and holy orders are centered around the nuptial mystery, a spousal relationship. And that sits at the heart of these two sacraments. A call to holiness, a call to be one with God. That oneness, that union, that's the nuptial and the spousal mystery. So I want to start with holy matrimony tonight and take a look at that, and then we'll slide into holy orders and see what questions you might have. Keep in mind that this is a daylight saving time night, so it is already 7:12, and this night only goes till 7:30. So we're going to try to get everything done in 15 minutes. No, we will spread this out. Okay, so a holy matrimony. We look at marriage as something that has evolved over time, because marriage obviously predates Christianity. Christians didn't invent marriage. Marriage was something that already exists in the world. We talk about marriage as a natural vocation, that everybody in some way is called to marriage. Whether you actually are married or not, that there's a natural vocation that is just embedded in who we are. And as we look back into the creation stories of Adam and Eve, we recognize that God creates man and woman to be in this relationship with one another that will mirror the relationship that he himself has with his people. But before we get there, I just want to take a look at marriage in general. Starting back, way back in ancient civilizations, why marriage? Today, when people get married, it's usually about love. And that's nice. But marriage was not always about love. Only recently in human history has marriage really been about love. Probably for a good long time, marriage was about survival. You marry to stay alive. You marry, you couple, you have families, you have clans, you have tribes, you build communities in these bonds of relationship in order to stay alive. And you build families, and you build large families, because more than half of your kids are going to die in their childhood. That life is hard, and it can't be lived alone. And so we see already a natural call that is woven into the human person that does this. And as human civilization goes on, that is codified. and marriage then it becomes contractual. Still, a little bit of survival is in there. Like, in order to have a place in society, in order that my family will be well provided for, in order for us to have an alliance with one another and have some clout in this or that place, or again, just to survive in the modern world, not the modern world I'm talking about, but still many years ago, we need to marry. And so marriage is set out very contractually. Here's what I'm going to provide. Here's what you're going to provide. I'm going to give you my daughter. You're going to give me 3 goats and a bag of gold, and we're going to call it even, and we're going to sit down and write this contract, and our families are united, and that's how it goes. Very contractual. The contract, then, is, of course, something man-made, can be broken. We can break a contract, because a contract is based on an if-then statement. If you do this, then I will do that. And if you don't do this, then I don't have to do that. So the contract is something that can end in divorce. A contract can be undone. The contractual relationship begins to shift, I think, really, in the Jewish law. Remember, Judaism is both culture and faith. It is civilization and religion. In Judaism, their law was their religious law. So the contracts formed in Judaism also had a spiritual nature to them. And so the people, as they still filled out a contract, the fathers still prepared a contract for their sons and daughters, and they joined their kids in marriage, and you could present a bill of divorce, and so on and so forth. But because there's a spiritual nature to marriage in the Jewish understanding of things, you see a tense balance between contract and covenant. A contract is based on the if-then. A covenant is not. A covenant says, I will do this regardless of what you do in return. The covenantal relationship is the relationship that God reveals to his people throughout the Old Testament. Many times throughout the Old Testament, the prophets, the writings, use the image of God as a bridegroom and Israel as a bride. And that Israel, time and time again, has been unfaithful to the relationship that she has with God. And nevertheless, even though she has run off and followed other gods and has sold herself with other peoples and this, that, and the other thing, God always remains faithful to his bride and keeps calling her back and restoring that relationship. This covenant that God reveals cannot be broken. So this covenantal relationship and the contractual relationship are in tension with one another. Contracts can be broken, covenants cannot be broken. This is what prompts the question to Jesus. When the scribes and the Pharisees and his own disciples come along and say, Jesus, what do you say about divorce? I mean, you have to wonder where this question is coming out of. This is where it's coming out of. It's coming out of because they recognize that even there's a contradiction in their own system. Moses allowed divorce, but what do you say? And Jesus says, Moses allowed it because you're a bunch of hardheads. And you wouldn't listen to the scriptures that kept describing marriage as a covenant and kept living it as a contract. But in the beginning, that is not what the Father desires. Man and woman are one, and you cannot undo what has been done. And so Jesus clearly rejects the contractual nature of marriage in favor of the covenantal nature for marriage. St. Paul then will take this idea and run with it, particularly in the letter to the Ephesians, as he begins to describe marriage relationships. And it's Paul who will affix the word sacrament to marriage for the first time. Paul describes the relationship that Jesus has with his people, the church. And it mirrors the relationship that the scriptures describe as God having with Israel. So once again, nothing is new under the sun. Jesus reveals what always has been and always will be. Jesus reveals that I am God, and I am wedding my people who put me to death and were unfaithful, and yet I give myself to my bride forever. And if the bride, the church, does that in return, St. Paul says, look at this relationship between God and church, that there is a union there. There is a great mystery there. And when a husband and a wife lay down their lives for one another, as Christ did for the church, then they enter into this mystery. And he says it is a great mystery. And the Greek word he uses is mysterion, when translated into Latin, sacramentum, translated into English, sacrament. Paul describes this as a great sacrament. So what does he mean? What is a sacrament? A sacrament is something that not only reveals God, but makes him present. Reveals Jesus Christ, but also makes him present. So what Paul is saying is when you have these two baptized Christians, and they are coming together, and they are desiring to do what Jesus himself did for everyone, and they want to do that for each other, that is a sacrament. Not only is Christ present, or not only is Christ symbolized there, but he is also made present. He is in that relationship. He becomes present in that relationship. And so now, for the Catholic mind, the church does not understand marriage unless it is sacramental. Marriage, because of this evolution from survival to contract covenant to covenant to sacrament, the church realizes there has been an evolution in this process. And we are now at a point where we understand marriage to be sacramental. And we can't go backwards. This is why it's not permitted for two Catholics to marry apart from the church, because we don't recognize that. That would be like saying in the next presidential election, all the white men can vote, but women and anyone of color stay home. You can't go back. We have gone through an evolution, and we have come to a greater realization of what citizenship means. And so it is with marriage. If we deny the sacrament and embrace a former version of marriage, we are devolving. We are unevolving in our understanding of marriage and going back to a lesser reality. So the church holds up marriage as a sacrament. And I have to point out that it's really only the Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches that hold marriage as a sacrament today. I know there are a lot of other church weddings, but these are not sacramental by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe they're covenantal. Maybe they understand them as a covenant. Some of them talk about it as in covenant language. Some of them talk about it more in contractual relationships. Others talk about them as the contract that is blessed by the religious community in their ceremony. But it's the Catholic and Orthodox churches that understand that this is beyond what two human beings are doing, and it is something that God himself does in them. Because a sacrament is always less about what we do and more about what God does. And so we get out of the way. In fact, it is the declaration at the end of a marriage. What God has joined, let no one put asunder. God has done something here, not us. We participated in it, but God was the main actor here, as in all of the sacraments, and we have our role. So, that kind of just sets the stage now for when we talk about marriage. What are we talking about? We're talking about a vocation to which many people are called. It's the most prevalent vocation, obviously, in the Catholic Church. Most people are called to marriage for the upbuilding of the human family and their own selves and the family of the church. That they are called to to be in love with one another and to live that love in order to save the other person. That the kind of love we talk about is a salvific kind of love. That I want to be Jesus for you. I want to love you in such a way that you will know the love of God when He saved you. That's the kind of love I want for you. I want to love you for your good, for your betterment, for your growth. And I want to sacrifice for you so that you can have life. Even if it kills me, and marriage does. Even if it kills me, I want this for you. And the other one says, I want to do the reciprocal. I want to love you as Jesus loves you. And I want to offer myself for you, for your betterment. And in that, there's also the I want to receive God's love from you. That I find what it means to love as God loves in you. That we help each other on the road to salvation. That for so many of us, God can be abstract. Like, what do we mean when we're talking about God's love? What do we mean when we're talking about intimate love with God? What do we mean when we talk about that kind of sacrifice or commitment? That's what we find in this other person. Like, in this relationship, we are called to find what fidelity really means. We're called to find what freedom really means. We're called to find what life-givingness really means. What all of these things really mean. I find them in you. That's what love, that's what matrimony aims to do. It's impossible for anyone to be able to do that. It's like, hey, I'm going to be Jesus for you. Okay. It's impossible to do that. It's impossible to be that for the other person without the grace of the sacrament. It is the grace of the sacrament that changes you and makes your love into the love of Christ. And so, as a husband or as a wife, we have to be docile to that. We have to be docile to that spirit that says, no, husband, you need to die to self right now because your wife needs something else from you. Or, no, wife, you need to die to self right now because your husband needs something else from you right now. And so it does require a death to self. We learn how to become Jesus for one another, but we let that grace help us to do that. So when we think about marriage as a sacrament, I guess in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about becoming Jesus for one another and entering into this mutual, covenantal, sacramental relationship where we can find that. That's why the church, Catholics, need permission to marry someone outside or who's not Catholic. If you marry a non-Catholic, you need to sign documents. You need to get permission from the bishop in order to do that. Because not everybody has the same understanding of marriage. And so it's like, okay, I want to marry this other person, and they're not Catholic. So how can we ensure that this understanding of marriage is going to be there between the two of you? And so we have to make sure that there is proper preparation, not only for two Catholics, but especially then if you're involving someone who's not Catholic, and even more so for someone who's not Christian, who doesn't even understand that. How do you enter into marriage without that very basic common understanding? Can happen, but it requires an extra step, because this is serious business. The church takes marriage very seriously, because it really sums up. When people ask me about Scripture, for example, like when I teach the Bible or Scripture classes, that's my summary. You want to know what the Bible is about? The Old Testament is really about the courtship of God and his girlfriend, Israel. It's a courtship. It's a long courtship. And they are going back and forth and chasing each other around and learning how to love and finding one another. And it all comes to a great culmination in the Song of Songs, which is a beautiful love poem about these two who have been on this journey together. And the whole New Testament is about the wedding of these two. It's about the wedding of God's people to himself. That Jesus comes and engages us, quite literally engages us. And then he gives himself flesh and blood, and he unites himself to us, humanity, to the church. And it all is summed up in the great wedding feast described in the book of Revelation. That there is the bride, here she comes to meet her groom, and they are united for all eternity. Scripture is about marriage. Scripture is about the nuptial love of God and his people. So marriage is so important because it helps us understand the love that God has for his people. So let me pause, because I've been rambling there for a good long time. And before we get into the specifics of the sacrament, just kind of maybe in the overview, are there any questions or thoughts or things that are jumping out? Okay, yeah.
So my girlfriend flew to Las Vegas and got married, and came back and asked the church for a blessing. One pastor said no, and she went to another church, and that pastor did a blessing ceremony.
No, we use, okay, so the question is, if you get married outside of the church, you get married in the courthouse, you get married in some pretty garden, or you go to Las Vegas or whatever, you have your contractual marriage. And then you realize, oh, and the language we use is, I'm going to have my marriage blessed. That is terrible language. We use it all the time, but it is about the wrongest thing you could say about that. Because first of all, there is no marriage there, so there is nothing to bless. There is a contract that has been signed, and the state calls it marriage, but I look at that and say, you have a contract. And so there's no marriage to bless. So when someone who has been civilly married comes to the church and asks, usually that question, I want my marriage blessed, the church calls it a convalidation. That in other words, we need to take this thing that you have and make it valid. We need to make it real. And so the way we do that is you are going to now receive the sacrament of matrimony as if you never had this contract. So we do for them what we would do for anybody who is coming to us that just got engaged. If you have a contract or if you don't have a contract, neither one of you have the sacrament. So you've got marriage preparation over here, you've got marriage preparation over here. It is the same thing. Now it might depend, it might be a little different depending on how many years that contractual relationship has existed. So if someone comes to me after 25 years of civil marriage and says, you know, Father, I've just come to faith and I want to receive the sacrament of matrimony, or I want to have my marriage blessed, is what they'll probably say. And so then it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of practical stuff that we don't need to go through. But we still need to do some marriage prep with you. It's going to look different than if I have two kids fresh out of college getting married and who don't know anything about marriage in the world. That's going to be different than someone who's been together for 25 years and has been slogging along together in this marriage relationship. So in that sense, yeah, there is something there, but it's not yet marriage. And that's what we're doing. We're bringing it to marriage. If you're Catholic. Because this gets so complicated. So y'all need to get another drink here pretty soon, because marriage is very complicated when it comes to talking about the validity of the sacrament and what we do in various situations. So but we will get all to that, so we'll go further down that rabbit hole in a bit. Okay? Well, let's talk about the sacrament just for a moment. So as all things, the church defines what makes a sacrament. What are the necessary ingredients? Eucharist, you need to have a priest, you need to have unleavened bread, you need to have grape wine, or wheat bread, grape wine, and you have to have the words of the Mass, and you have Eucharist. Baptism, water poured over an unbaptized person with the Trinitarian formula, you know you have baptism. So what makes for the sacrament of marriage? There are a few ingredients, if you will, that make for marriage. Number one, that you have a man and a woman who are free to marry. That you have two people, a man and a woman who are free to enter into marriage. That the church's minister is present to witness that marriage. Thirdly, that they exchange the vows that form the sacrament, the sacramental vows given to one another. That there are two witnesses that witness this thing. And I'll tell you that in a second, why that's been added to the ritual. And lastly, that each of them desire and intend what marriage desires and intends. So, 4 of those things you can see. Man, woman, free to marry, minister, 2 witnesses, looks at vows, looks like we got it all. It's the stuff that's in the heart and in the head that we can't see. And that's where we start asking the questions then. Well, do you intend to be faithful to this person? Do you intend to love this person with your whole self? Total. Do you intend that life and openness to life is here? Do you intend these things? So we try to dig it out to the best of our ability. And once all of those things are there, we understand that sacramental marriage happens. In the Roman Catholic Church, that those are the ingredients, as it were, for the sacrament of marriage in the Roman Catholic Church. What most people, even Catholics, fail to recognize is that the church's minister, who could be a deacon, who could be a priest, who could be a bishop, or could be a layman designated by the bishop, that whoever the church's minister is, their job is not to do anything. Their job is to watch and to receive. My job, I don't do anything. I don't wave my magic wand and say, poof, you are now married. You will not go to a Catholic ceremony, a wedding ceremony, and hear the minister say, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You hear that on television, you hear it in movies, you might hear it in other wedding ceremonies. A Catholic priest, deacon, bishop, whomever will never say, I now pronounce you husband and wife. It's not part of the ritual. You can read through that ritual. It's not in there. At the end, I might say, I want to introduce to you for the first time Mr. and Mrs. Yay, husband and wife. But there's not a part of the ceremony that the priest, deacon, bishop, whomever says that, because the minister of the sacrament of marriage is the groom and the bride. They minister the sacrament to each other. And they receive the sacrament from each other. And so there is no power that is coming out of me in a wedding ceremony. It is coming out of you two standing before one another. That when you recite your vows to one another, that is the sacramental formula. That is what makes the sacrament right there. And so the bride and the groom give and receive the vows to one another. And when we're working on them, when I go through the vows for the couple, one of the things that I like to point out is that in the vows, you say, I take you to be my husband or to be my wife. How different that is than saying, I come here to present myself as your husband, or I promise to be your wife. You do not get to be a husband until she calls you husband. And you do not get to be her wife until he names you his wife. There is a very humbling moment in this exchange of those vows that you stand silent before this other person and you let them change your identity. They will tell you who you are, and you will receive that. And that's what makes you a husband. You don't make yourself a husband. She makes you a husband. and you do not make yourself a wife. He makes you a wife. And that adds such a richness to that sacrament, because there's such a giving of yourself. I stand humbly before you as you give me the sacrament, and I receive it. I have responsibilities now as soon as I become your husband, and as soon as I become your wife. But the priest, the deacon, the bishop, whoever the minister is, their job is to witness that and to assure that all of the sacramental parts were in play. Which is also what complicates marriage, because marriage doesn't just come from the priest doing X, Y, or Z. There's a lot of moving parts, and every once in a while, those moving parts don't all lock into place. And that is what an annulment is all about. And we can put a pin on that for a moment and talk about annulments later on. But an annulment essentially puts the marriage on trial. Were all the elements present to make a sacrament? Namely, what were they intending? Were they capable of intending? Did they know what they were doing? And so on and so forth. All the internal stuff that we can't see on the wedding day. That's typically where annulments come into play. Now, I've been saying Roman Catholic Church throughout this, because each of the churches, the various Catholic churches, so the Roman Catholic Church, that's the way it works for us. In the East, in the Eastern Catholic churches, the bride and the groom are not the ministers of the sacrament. The bride and the groom receive the sacrament from the priest. And so if you are married in a Greek Catholic church, or a Byzantine Catholic church, or a Maronite Catholic church, a deacon cannot witness those marriages. A layman cannot witness those marriages. Only a priest or a bishop can witness those marriages, because he is the one that causes the marriage to happen. And it doesn't happen in the vows. After the couple has exchanged the vows, the priest then puts a crown on top of the heads of the bride and the groom. He crowns them. He makes them look like Christ the King and his bride, the church. And so it is in that act of making you Christ and his bride that the sacrament takes place in the Eastern Catholic churches and in the Orthodox churches as well. So the sacramental formula is a little differently depending on the ritual church to which we belong. Like I said, it's complicated. Any questions? I'll just kind of stop along the way because I don't want things to get lost.
So this is a bit of a hypothetical. Let's presume that an engaged couple is going on like some plane, trip to visit some family somewhere else, and they crash on like an island. Now that marriage has evolved, do they have to take up, their cross and live as single people that really love each other, or can they get married?
So what makes you love these questions? So you have this couple who are engaged, get married, they're on a plane, and the plane goes down, and they end up on a deserted desert island, and they weren't married because that was coming in the future, and so nobody knows where they're at. So can they live as husband and wife on this deserted desert island, or must they live as single people now, doomed to that location for the rest of their lives? That's a good question. They cannot be married. And they could. Here's what I'll say. And this has no authority whatsoever.
I want to remind you, this is being recorded.
This is what I'm going to say. That if after a sufficient amount of time, they realize that their plight is permanent and that they are not going to be found or discovered, that they could, to the best of their ability, profess their vows to one another before God there on that desert island and take up marriage, which is their natural vocation to begin with. So it's not aberrant. So there's a natural vocation there that they're building on, and live as husband and wife. If then they are rescued, they have the obligation to complete that sacrament in its proper way. That's what I'm going to say.
Oh.
right. There is that, yeah. But to that point, this is where the idea of witnesses came in. Because most of us are familiar with Romeo and Juliet. And Romeo and Juliet, you have this couple, and their parents don't like the fact that they like each other. They're from feuding families. Romeo and Juliet love each other, and so they sneak off. They find a friar who's a priest, and they ask to be married, and he marries them in secret. Priest and the two. They exchange their vows, he witnesses it, writes it down in the church book, all is done. There is no record of it, and there are no witnesses. This is not just a story. This happens, and happened in real life apparently enough, where the church said, okay, this is causing problems. So we must have external witnesses. We cannot have private weddings, because you need to be able to prove that those two exchanged their vows, and that it's a public act. So marriage is, like all sacraments, is a public act. So marriage cannot be a private thing. So that's why the witnesses are there. But in that case, there are no witnesses. Yeah, there could be some starfish or whatever.
Okay, just clear something up for me. When we were talking about baptism, you said that anybody could baptize anyone. A Lutheran could baptize.
Anybody could baptize anybody.
And that baptism is
Valid.
is a baptism, a valid
Correct.
baptism. So if a couple is married in a Lutheran church or a Methodist church, why isn't that a valid marriage?
Okay, see, we're using different words now. So here's where it gets complicated. So, Catholics are bound to receive sacramental marriage because we understand marriage as a sacrament. And so anyone baptized Catholic must receive sacramental marriage in order for that marriage to be true and valid. If you have two people who are not Catholic, but they are Christian, two Lutherans, a Lutheran and an Episcopalian, an interdenominational, non-whatever they are, and they marry in the way that they know how, it is not sacramental, because they're not even intending sacramental, but it is valid, because we have a natural call to marriage. And that becomes a valid marriage. So if your Lutheran friend invites you to their Lutheran wedding, and you go to that wedding, that is a valid marriage. Which is why, this confuses people too, that if they divorce, and Lutheran divorcee now wants to marry Catholic person, the church looks at Lutheran person and says, you were married once before. You need to go through an annulment process. But I'm not Catholic. But you are a human being capable of making a vow. And if you made a valid vow, you may not be free to enter into marriage with this person here. So the validity of your marriage needs to be ascertained. So while it's not sacramental, it could be valid. And that's for baptized people. For the unbaptized, again, marriage is a natural vocation. So to unbaptized people, Jewish wedding, go to a Jewish wedding to maybe two of your Jewish colleagues, and they get not baptized, and they get married, that we understand to be a natural binding marriage. Because again, they were capable of making vows, and they entered into marriage to the best of their ability. Like that's how we understand marriage to be. And marriage pre-exists in Christianity. So that if that's the understanding and that's what they're working with, that becomes valid marriage. Catholic boy and Methodist girl want to get married, and they decide to get married in Methodist girl's church, that is an invalid marriage, because Catholic boy needs to receive the sacrament. And so typically what happens is they will come and receive marriage preparation and prepare for the sacrament. And if it is super important for a Methodist girl to be married in her community because maybe her grandfather is a pastor, or maybe she is been very, very active and came to faith, and actually Catholic boys don't practice very much, so at least she's the one moving things along, then the bishop can grant Methodist pastor man the ability to serve as the church's witness for their sacramental marriage. Because they're going to be the givers and receivers of marriage. All we need is the church's witness. Who can witness a marriage? A bishop, a priest, a deacon, or anybody appointed by the bishop. And this is what happens in a lot of places where there aren't priests around. So if you go out to the wilds of the Amazon or to Africa where the priest only comes around once every 3 months, the catechist there might have the ability to serve as the church's minister to receive the vows of couples and see that they are properly married. This is where it gets very complicated.
I might have misunderstood, but didn't you say that the ingredients for a valid Catholic wedding or a sacramental marriage was a part of that the Eucharist, the unleavened bread and
No.
Right.
For a valid marriage, bride, groom, minister, vows, intentions, and the witnesses. Because bride and groom are one, and the witnesses. So at a Catholic wedding, for two Catholics, it's appropriate to celebrate that wedding within the context of Mass. For a Catholic and a non-Catholic, we typically celebrate the wedding in a liturgy of the Word outside of Mass, since they both cannot partake in the Eucharist, unless there's some just reason or good reason to do otherwise. So that there are two forms of celebrating marriage, within the context of Mass, outside of the context of Mass. And both are equally valid, because the sacrament is exactly the same. It's just either Mass continues, or we begin to wrap things up.
So if we go back to Catholic boy and Methodist girl,
Catholic boy and Methodist girl.
and they get married in the Methodist church, but the bishop has not granted anything, so it is not valid.
Not valid.
If they get divorced, and Catholic boy then wants to marry a Catholic girl in the Catholic church, no annulment is needed?
An annulment, well, yes and no. Is an annulment needed? So, Catholic boy, Methodist girl, they marry without the benefit of the sacrament, so it is not a valid ceremony. They get divorced. Now Catholic boy meets Catholic girl, and they want to get married. I ask Catholic boy, have you been married before? Yes, but it was outside of the church, so it doesn't count. Like, well, we have to have a document that proves that. And so we need to actually go through, fill out all of the facts so that it can be looked at and indeed, in a sense, notarized. Yep, you were right, it didn't mean anything. And so it's as much, we call it an annulment, but it's called a lack of form, that you did not have the marriage form present. And therefore, it's obvious that this wasn't a marriage. It doesn't go to a tribunal, so there's no court that is open for this marriage. It is an administrative process. One of the jurists in the chancery will look at that and say, yep, we don't need to even think about this one because it's clear there were ingredients missing. Church's minister not present, invalid, here you go. It takes 6 weeks to process. You know, it's just boom, done. As opposed to 6 to 8 months, if a full trial is open for the marriage.
Would a good confession then be required?
A good confession would be required for simulating a sacrament. Yeah.
So if a Catholic marries and they get divorced,
Who did the Catholic marry?
well, a Catholic.
Okay, two Catholics got married in the
Catholic
church.
and a Catholic married.
Yep.
They get divorced. Can they take the sacrament of Holy Communion.
If two Catholics marry in the sacrament of matrimony and then they divorce, can they receive Holy Communion?
Correct.
Yes, asterisk. So long as they do not enter into another relationship. That they reckon as soon as they enter into another relationship, now they are being unfaithful to the person they said they would not be unfaithful to. And so if they remain single and recognize that I am spiritually bound to this person that I cannot live with for whatever reason, that I will continue now spiritually supporting this person, though I cannot physically or emotionally or psychologically be with them. So yes, there's no sin involved now. But if I meet someone else and we start canoodling, then that is going to put a damper on the ability to receive Holy Communion. Because now I'm having an intimate relationship with someone who is not my spouse.
Even if you're just dating.
Yeah, if your husband was just dating someone and said, "Oh, we're not doing anything,"
But I think you're divorced.
doesn't matter. The civil contract doesn't affect the sacramental bond.
Okay.
So you are still sacramentally bound until proven otherwise. So innocent until proven guilty. The marriage is there until it's proven not to be. So we assume that the marriage is there. So what an annulment does then, a formal case, is it's a process because it's meant to be a healing process. An annulment is not opened until 1 year after a divorce is finalized. That you have to demonstrate that this is irreconcilable. And a year's period of time of not getting back together is one of those proofs. And so the annulment is opened after a year's period of time, and it basically asks you to trace your relationship from the beginning. What was your courtship like? What was happening between the two of you at the time of your marriage and in the immediate aftermath? And then what led to the eventual breakup? And so it is a descriptive, it's like a life story of your marriage. And the point of that is to dig out what was lacking. Maybe it was freedom. Maybe as a Catholic girl, I was living in a home and my father and brothers were abusive to me. And as soon as I turned 18, I got out of that house and I met this guy who seemed to love me, and he treated me well, not like anything I had ever known. And we got together and I married him after 6 months, the bare minimum. And we lived together for 7 years and then realized, whoa, I just married my father all over again. And this guy is not good to me either. And he is abusive and everything. And so I divorced. In an annulment case, the annulment judges would look at that and say, it appears that you were not free to enter into that marriage because you were running away from something else that you weren't dealing with. There was a psychological thing there that prohibited you from actually entering into marriage with this person. You were not running to him, you were running away from something else. You didn't know what you were doing. And so you could not have had a sacramental marriage. So the court decides then that there was an ingredient missing. Marriage is not there. You are both free to marry. So in an annulment, the couple are not put on trial. The marriage bond is put on trial. Did the sacrament happen? And if the sacrament happened, there's nothing the church can do. Because when what God has joined, no one can divide. I cannot undo a sacrament. I cannot unbaptize you. I cannot unconsecrate the hosts in the tabernacle. I cannot unconfirm you. I cannot unmarry you. So if marriage is there, marriage is there. And there is one, just to muddy the waters once again, there is one case where the church gives the Pope the ability to dissolve a marriage. And that is the case of an unbaptized person who now wishes to marry a Catholic in order to rebaptize him or herself. So if this unbaptized person was married before, their marriage was not sacramental. It was a natural marriage. And now this person, after they divorced, has met this Catholic and has come to faith and wants to be baptized and wants to be saved and wants to enter into marriage with this person. They can present the case to the Holy Father, and the Holy Father can release this person, this unbaptized person, from his or her natural marriage. In other words, dissolve the contract in order for a sacrament. We'll dissolve this lesser thing in favor of a greater thing. And so the great is called, in fact, the type of case is called in favor of faith. It is a favor of faith case. If this is someone who's coming to salvation, then yes, the Holy Father can do that. I just did one of these recently for a couple here in this parish. Then we wrote Pope Francis, not directly, it's kind of indirectly, but the case gets taken to him, and he signs, and it comes back, and the declaration is made. And now I can go into preparation with this couple.
So that has to go through the Pope?
The Pope is the only one who has the authority to dissolve a natural marriage.
So quick question. Two Catholics marry, have children, get divorced, get an annulment. Does that annulment affect the children's legitimacy?
Does an annulment affect the children's, if you have children, does an annulment affect children's legitimacy? The church does not speak of legitimacy and illegitimacy anymore. That is more of an antiquated idea, and it is not, it meant something when you were talking about succession and who's going to sit on the throne, but it doesn't really mean anything for most anything else. And so we don't use that language anymore. So no, any conjugal act, any fruit of the conjugal act that you engaged in during the time that you were married is seen as virtuous and fruitious and good because you were doing what you were was assumed to be good. The fact that you found out that the marriage didn't exist previously is not your fault, and certainly not your children's fault. You were not sleeping with someone who wasn't your spouse. You both acted under the good intention that this was my spouse. And you thought it was until it was proven otherwise.
So when you're talking about the Pope's ability to dissolve a previous marriage,
Natural marriage.
For the sake of faith, it just seems like if they're physically able to be baptized and come to the church without the marriage, wouldn't that be the default? I can understand maybe if they lived in this remote or very restrictive community.
Desert island?
No, like a restrictive community
Yes.
where they couldn't get out of it unless they were married to someone. But aside from that, I don't quite get why you couldn't just be baptized.
The person could be baptized.
Right.
So could the person be baptized if they really are desiring faith? Yes, if they haven't entered into a marriage, absolutely, this person could be baptized. But part of the whole journey, if this other person that they have now fallen in love with has been instrumental in that bringing them to faith, then they're asking, it could happen before or after baptism. Because when I filled out the form to send to the Holy Father, one of the questions was, has the person been baptized since leaving this person over here? And so it's possible to have been baptized, but many of these things are discovered all at the same time. So it's usually because of this other person that I haven't been brought to faith. And so the whole journey is kind of happening at the same time. So usually what happens is they come to me and say, Father, we want to get married. And I ask the question, have you been married before? before, and they said, oh yeah, there was this thing. I'm like, okay, there's a thing. So now we have to do something else before we can go forward. So we have to put your marriage prep on pause until we can determine that you are free to marry this person. So it usually is a discovery sort of thing. And it's like, well, we were hoping to get married and be baptized and raised in the academy of love. I know, and I'm going to help you do that. But we need to make sure that you are free, because you made a vow. And words mean things. We don't treat that much in our world today. The words mean things and promises mean things, but they really do. The church still holds it a sacrament that God created by speaking, and it was. Words have effects. Okay, we're not going to get to holy orders if we keep, I'm happy to go on with marriage forever, and we can do holy orders, we can do a summer thing, but any other questions about marriage? We could go on for marriage. There's a lot. It's not like... Good? Okay, let's dip into holy orders just a little bit. So, holy orders, then, is another vocation or another sacrament of service or sacrament of vocation. And the holy orders is the process of changing a man into a deacon, into a presbyter, or into a bishop. And holy orders then comes from the understanding of what Jesus did at the Last Supper with his disciples. That when he gathered those disciples around the table of the Last Supper and gave them the Eucharist for the first time, in that same moment, he gave them the priesthood and made them his first priests, and says to them, do this in memory of me. And in the resurrection, he will once again breathe the Spirit upon them and tell them, forgive sins, go and preach as I have done. And he will tell them, go and baptize, and he will give them this mandate. So the sacrament of holy orders does just that. It provides the ordering of the church. That just as the man and the woman become the face of Jesus for one another and affect each other's salvation in some way, so the church needs that for herself. So the church, as the bride of Christ, is wed to Jesus, the bridegroom. Jesus decided that it would be better for us if he left, and he ascended into heaven. And so if you picture the church with the groom, Christ, and Christ steps out of the picture and says, I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back. The bride seems very lonely, standing there with no one next to her. Or if you imagine it as St. Paul describes the church, the body of Christ. The church is the body of Christ, and each of us are its members. And Jesus is the head of the church. And he directs us, and he moves us along, and joins us together, and all of these things. Again, Jesus ascends into heaven, and now you have a headless body. And that there's something not right about that. So, holy orders is when Jesus established his apostles and gave them the ministry, he essentially asks them to stand in his place as his steward, as his minister. And he uses so many references and so many parables throughout the giving of the keys, as the king would give the keys to a steward, and all of these sorts of things. So Jesus asks the minister, the apostle, to be me for the church. Do what I did for the church. You have to do that. So this person is ordained to step into this place in the church, to visibly represent the head to the body, or to visibly represent the bridegroom to the bride. And this is why I said that nuptial relationship is what underlies both matrimony and holy orders. That the priest is called to espouse the church in a nuptial way. That the priest has to take Jesus' relationship that he had with the church and make that his own for his own salvation and for the church's salvation. So just as a bride and a groom look at each other and say, I want to be Jesus for you, when I look at the church, this is Jesus for me. This is what makes me holy. This right here, you, the body of the church, makes me who I am, makes me holy, tells me who I am. And likewise, the church, in order to be holy, looks to the minister, the priest, and finds Jesus, hopefully. And that's the goal, that we become Christ for one another in that same nuptial mystery, in that same nuptial relationship. So Holy Orders then begins with the apostles. And they are understood today to be the first bishops. They were the priests. So you heard me describe Holy Orders in 3 levels: bishop, presbyter, deacon. I didn't say priest. I said bishop, presbyter, deacon. I am a presbyter. That is the order that I inhabit. Deacon Dan over there is deacon. I am presbyter. Archbishop George Lucas is bishop. Presbyters and bishops are priests. So when we talk about the priests of the church, we're talking about those who are presbyters and those who are bishops. So basically, we have to start with the bishop. The apostles were the first bishops. And St. Paul is the one that gives us all these names. When you read his letters to the different communities, he says, I send my greetings to Timothy, your bishop, and to his deacons. I greet so-and-so, the bishop, and his presbyters. It's Paul. So we see that already, before the year 65, the church had already fully been ordered according to the model that we have today of deacons, presbyters, and bishops. The Acts of the Apostles describe the formation of the first deacons. That the bishops, the apostles, were the priests of the community. They couldn't do the work of the church as the church was growing. And so they needed help. And so they called forward 7 guys of reputable standing, and they ordained them, laid hands on them, gave them the power of the Holy Spirit, and called them to be ministers alongside them. So the diaconal ministry, the deacon, the word deacon literally means the server, the one who serves at table. The only other place we see the word deacon used in Scripture is at the wedding of Cana. Jesus speaks to the deacons and says, bring me the water jars. Deacons were the waiters. They were the ones that served. That's what that word literally means. So they were the ones that served at table. So the bishops, the apostles, needed people to assist them in the work that had to be done. And so they called forward these guys, made them deacons, did not share the priesthood with them, but shared the ministry with them. I need you to be my hands. And that was one of the most beautiful things. When I first came to St. Charles here, one of the first people I met was Deacon Dave Fishman. And when I sat down with him and he was telling me, kind of his story and his role, he described part of his vocation. He says, part of my vocation is here to St. Charles, but part of it is out there, because Archbishop Lucas cannot be everywhere. And he cannot be at the soup kitchen all the time. He cannot be down helping the poor, and he cannot be over here. But I can be his hands. And that's what I was ordained to do, to bring the church, the hand of the bishop, here into these places where he just cannot be all the time. And I thought that was beautiful. That was a beautiful understanding of what it meant to be deacon. So the deacon is at the service of the bishop to help extend the bishop's presence. So a deacon is an ordained minister because as the bishop's servant, the deacon represents the church. which is why the deacon also preaches, baptizes, and witnesses marriages, because he is a he is an official minister of the church in the bishop's name. The vestment that the deacon wears at Mass that looks like a big oversized t-shirt with the sleeves and the long, that is cut that way for part of the reason it's cut with sleeves is because he's the one that's supposed to be moving everything around the altar, and mine will just knock everything down if I don't pull it back. So a deacon's vestment is cut to be of service. But the deacon's vestment was originally the bishop's vestment. The bishop, when the bishop vests, he wears the dalmatic and the chasuble on top of that. So the priest's vestment and the vestment of service under that. So in order to show the early church that this guy is me, when he speaks, I want you to hear me, I'm going to give him my vestment, and he's going to wear that in my place. So the vestment that the deacon wears today is one of the vestments that a bishop wears if he gets fully vested. So it's the bishop's vestment, because he's the bishop's servant. And the church was going along great. And then it's getting bigger. They were adding numbers. They were adding people over and over and over again. And what the apostle would do is he comes into a community, he makes disciples, baptizes people, there's deacons to assist him, and then these communities get big. And I can't do all of I can't forgive all of the sins. I can't celebrate the masses. I can't heal the sick. I can't do all the preaching that needs to happen. And so the apostles, in their wisdom, share the priesthood. Just as Moses shared his priesthood in the Old Testament. And he designated 72 others, or however many he did, and he had them assist him. So the apostles did the same thing. And so presbyters, the word presbyter means the elders of the community. And so the bishop, the apostles, called forward the presbyters and ordained them and shared their priestly power with them. That now you possess the power of a priest. You can offer the Mass. You can stand in the person of Jesus Christ and offer the Mass. You can stand in the person of Jesus Christ and forgive sins. You stand in the person of Jesus Christ and anoint and heal the sick. And so they shared the priesthood with the presbyter. And so the presbyter, the deacon becomes the servant of the bishop. The presbyter is the co-worker with the bishop. That I do the things the bishop does. So I celebrate Mass. I confirm if I need to or have to. I forgive sins. I do the work of the high priest in the Archdiocese of Omaha as one of his co-priests. So he's extended, it's like because the bishop cannot be in every parish celebrating Sunday Mass for us all, he needs to have his stunt double. And so the presbyters are the stunt doubles for the bishop, which is why when I celebrate Mass, I mention who the bishop is. This is what I'm standing in for, by the way, George, our bishop. George, our bishop. If I celebrate Mass in another diocese, if I cross the river, it's still George, our bishop these days, but if I go the other way into Grand Island, I would say for Joseph, our bishop. For the bishop over there, if I'm celebrating Mass over there, because now I'm standing in for the bishop of Grand Island. So that's the name of the bishop is always mentioned. And if the bishop himself is celebrating, you will have noticed, he will say, for me, your unworthy servant. That he is there, right? And that's who I'm usually standing in for. And so the presbyter is a priest. The bishop is also a priest. So the bishops are the successors of the apostles. The presbyters and the priests are the co-workers with the bishops, and the deacons are the servants of the bishops who extend the ministry. So as priest, my job is to be situated in the place of the head or the place of the groom. And the deacon then situates himself in the place of the hands and to be the service at the table and the service of the word and the service of charity.
That's church law, not biblical.
What is?
What you just described about the deacons and the priests after the apostles.
That's all mentioned in the Bible. You read St. Paul's letters, and he describes the deacons, and describes the presbyters, and describes the apostles' work. So Paul, we get these words, we get these names from what Paul had written about in his letters to the early churches. And then you see, even after that, like when you read the very first of the church fathers who are writing just not even 30, 40 years after Paul wrote, like Ignatius or Irenaeus, they are talking the same language that Paul was talking and how the churches were structured and developed.
Early on, the confessional part, did the people just go to those particular?
Confession has its own history, and I will refer you back to that night when we talked about confession, because that is a long, again, it's the development of a sacrament. How we get the present form today and the forgiveness of sins, it grows over the historical history.
And early on, did the people have mass within their homes?
They did not have churches early, and so usually someone who had the biggest house that's where they would gather once they were kicked out of the synagogues. When the early Christians were kicked out of the synagogues, then they had to start meeting in other people's homes, and that's how that happened. They were excommunicated from the synagogues, and so they had to go into people's homes. And then they started building churches when it became legal to do so.
So what sacraments can a deacon administer?
The deacon administers the same sacraments that any non-priest can administer: baptism and matrimony.
Oh, he can matrimony,
He can witness matrimony,
and that's considered,
because it's the bride and the groom who are the ministers, so the deacon is witnessing it.
even though there's no mass?
The deacon wouldn't celebrate that. So if the deacon is doing the marriage, it is going to be a marriage outside of the Mass. Mhm.
So in the formation of priesthood, you go from being single to priest. Do you go single deacon priest? Is that?
So in the formation for priesthood, yes, the current, there's all kinds of things, so I don't think I could label them all. In order to be ordained a priest, you must be at least 25 years old. You must have completed 4 years of college and 4 years of seminary after that. So 4 years philosophy, 4 years of theology. You are ordained a deacon, and you must serve as a deacon for at least 6 months. So I was ordained a deacon October 7th, 1999, by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict later on, in Rome, in St. Peter's. And then that following summer, June 3rd, 2000, I was ordained a priest by Archbishop Curtis. So I was a little over 7-8 months a deacon. Now, there's a question as, do you have to be? That is the discipline of the church now, that you are ordained deacon in order to be ordained priest, in order to be ordained bishop.
I listened to a fascinating discussion recently about the fact that the modern setting of priests really kind of almost really being on their own in a parish setting, like kind of maybe hasn't been the norm so much, apart from say like a missionary, type of situation. I don't know, I was just wondering if you would comment on that a little bit. Like it used to be that priests maybe lived more in community than what they do today, and I'm just curious if you have some comments.
Yeah, there's different kinds of priesthood, and I think that, we talk about 2 kinds of priesthood today. We talk about diocesan priesthood, and we talk about religious priesthood. Diocesan priesthood is you are ordained for the diocese, and you serve where the bishop asks you to serve. Religious priesthood, you are ordained for a community, Benedictines, Dominicans, Jesuits, etc. So you do not belong to the diocese, and you belong to the province of the community. So if you are part of the Jesuit province, you then cover all of the states that are within that province. You aren't tied to the diocese. You're tied more to the mission. And communal priests, they take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So in poverty, they do not get to own anything of their own free will. And so everything, like when one of the Benedictines comes here to fill in for me for Mass when I'm not here, sometimes we get the Benedictines. We do not pay that priest to come here. We pay the monastery. The monastery gets paid because the priest himself doesn't get paid. The monastery does. The priest is poor, and the monastery divvies out their needs. So they take about poverty. They don't know anything. If I go and help someone, they pay me. And because I am a diocesan priest, and I do not take a vow of poverty, because I am asked to support myself. So in the living of a diocesan priest and a religious priest, those paths have grown up in very different ways throughout history. And that would be it would be interesting to look at historically, because it would differ in different parts of the world, it would differ at different times in the world, how much community priests actually lived in and how much they were on their own. I think it would be many and varied. It could be many and varied.
So did the origination of, like, say, the position of an archbishop, did that come, like, through more, like, administrative needs rather than, like, they go to a higher position?
And then as the church kept growing, that's essentially what happens. That's why deacons were ordained. And that's why presbyters were ordained. And then we had these 3 orders that were biblically structured and lasted for a very, very long time. And no one you just couldn't change that. But what you did was, as the church continued to grow and get more complicated, then the layers within those began to fan out a little bit. So you still have the diaconate, and then among the presbyters, you would have those who are priests, and then there's an honorific given to some priests, a monsignor, and that's more of just an honorific. It's a title. It doesn't get to do anything more or anything like that. It's just more of a nice title. And then bishops has broken up into many more categories. So then you have an archbishop who has usually been given some kind of administrative authority over other territories. So Archbishop Lucas here has some administrative oversight over Grand Island and the Diocese of Lincoln. And so when the Bishop of Lincoln took a leave of absence, Archbishop Lucas becomes the administrator of Lincoln because that is under his territory. So an archbishop has a little bit greater territory that he watches over. A cardinal is the priests, bishops that the Pope decides to personally name as his personal advisors throughout the world. And that's his free choice to name. He can name a bishop, he can name an archbishop, he could name a simple priest to be a cardinal. And then the Pope himself. Then there's there's major archbishops and patriarchs, but that's when the church is. I'm just talking about the Roman Church right now.
Is St. John's on the Creighton campus, is that diocesan, or is that part of the Creighton system?
The parish of St. John's, the parish that is there, I believe, is the diocese, but it is staffed by the religious community. So it's been given over to, but I believe it exists as a parish for the diocese. Because religious orders they may be in charge of parishes, but I don't think they actually possess parishes.
What is an acolyte and what are their specific duties?
In the history of ordination, when you were talking about when you're ordained a priest, so you had the bishops, you had the presbyters, you had the deacons. And then as the church again got more complicated, minor orders were added. And so you had the subdeacon, the acolyte, the lector, the exorcist, and the porter. Am I missing anyone? Yeah, exorcist was down there. And it all began with tonsure. So you were tonsured, you had your hair cut, and that entered you into the life of a cleric, and then you were made a porter, and your job was basically to keep the door. Then you were made an exorcist, and an exorcist was made to do simple blessings and, not like big movie-style exorcisms, just to kind of make people's lives holy, bless little things that people are bringing to be blessed. The lector proclaims the readings. The acolyte was essentially the one who proclaimed the New Testament reading, who carried the cross in processions, and who assisted the deacon, or I guess the subdeacon did that, but assisted with the serving at the altar, when it was part of the ordained lineup. The Second Vatican Council simplified that, and the subdiaconate and everything else was suppressed, and the ministries of lector and acolyte were created, but not as ordained ministries, but as lay ministries. So the acolyte is still a server who functions also as an EMHC and basically helps and assists the deacon at the altar.
Along the same lines, if a young man's discerning to be a priest, not everybody comes to the table with the same talents.
Right.
Some are going to be better speakers, better preachers, better teachers. Who decides what avenue to train that person or to steer them?
That is a good question. You get all kinds that are called to the priesthood, and when you look around the presbyterian, all the priests, there's many different people with lots of different talents, and all of our faults wrapped in there as well. And that's really the goal of the seminary, that they are well formed in the seminary, and it's just gone through another overhaul of what the church expects seminary formation to be on the spiritual level, the personal level, the psychological level, the human level, all of these different things, so that by the end of seminary, a man would be able to hopefully identify for himself, if he is called, where the church could help in that discernment. And I think we're trying to, I know even among priests today, in the diocese, we're trying to figure out better how to do assignments in the future in terms of a man's abilities and talents and the kind of work that would not only be up their alley, but also be nourishing for them and the community.
When a bishop retires, would it be fair to say that only diocesan priests are considered?
No. When a bishop retires, or a bishop dies, or a see is vacant, if Omaha is vacant because Archbishop Lucas dies or is transferred, then normally the process of making a bishop is long, and there's a lot of people are looking at these candidates. But no, it could be a diocesan priest, could be a religious priest, could be another bishop that is drawn from another diocese. So if we would get someone here after Archbishop Lucas, likely it would be someone who's already a bishop because they're being made an archbishop. And so it'd be someone who probably already has the experience of being a bishop.
Yeah.
Will women ever be priests?
Will women ever be priests? Not in the Catholic Church. And the reason, and again, this goes back to the nuptial mystery. It's not a matter of job description. It's a matter of nuptial relationship in Christian anthropology. That the priesthood is not functional. It is ontological. It results in the being. That anyone in this room can do the things that I do as a person, and the work of a priest. Diane does half the stuff that I do in the office, I don't know who runs the parish. I know what you do. But only I can be a father, and that is important if church is mother, to have that father, and that's why we call priests. We don't call priests my Lord. We call priests Father, because it is a relational title not a functional title. And so the relationality of that is super embedded into the vocation of the priest.
We've talked a lot about holy orders, so I'm going to follow up on that. What does a woman do when she becomes a nun?
It is, the process of becoming a religious is a deepening of your baptismal promises. And so often, when you become a monk or a nun, you are going deeper, and we call it a radical living out of your baptismal promises. And so there's no extra sacrament on top of that, but rather they are called to renew their baptisms and to further die to self. And so in some ceremonies, very dramatic, where the candidate will lay down on the floor and they will bring the funeral pall in and cover their body with the funeral pall that covers a casket, and they pray for this person because who he was or who she was has just died, and now they will be reborn. So again, it's the whole baptism again, and when you are reborn, you get a new name. Now you are Sister Teresa, or whatever, even though you were Joan, that you are a new person. So it is baptism, it's a deepening of your baptism and finding a new identity in that. There is a nuptial mystery, there is nuptial imagery as well, particularly when making final profession. A number of religious will receive a ring that they wear, or they'll receive a crown on their profession date, and then on their anniversaries, they will wear a crown over their habits or whatnot. So it kind of depends on the community, but there's some liberality with that. Okay, we're over our time, so I'll take one more question, and then we're going to remember that we're springing ahead tonight.
What's the time frame for the vow of celibacy and why the deacons?
Okay, so the question of the married priesthood, or unmarried priesthood, married diaconate, etc., etc. Never in the church's history have bishops ever been married. And there used to be, when you would, in the old outfits of bishops, before everything was reconstructed after the Second Vatican Council, on the back of a bishop's cassock was a little baby hood, like this little flap that just hung back here, a little baby hood. And that grew out of a long tradition that perhaps back in the day, at some point in the church's history, there may have been, particularly in the East, married priests. And you could never raise a married priest to the order of bishop, because the bishop has to be the groom to the church. And so he has to be wholeheartedly, single-mindedly for the church. So they would often go to the monasteries, and they would call monks out to be ordained bishops. And many monks wore hoods. And so when they became bishops, they just retained their hoods. And so as a vestige of that, there used to be little hoods on the back of bishops' cassocks, because back in the day, many bishops were called from the monasteries. That's why they wear the skull caps a lot, the purple or the red or the white skull cap, because the monks, when they had their head shaved, would cover it with a little skull cap, especially in cold weather, to keep warm. And so the bishops wear those skull caps today as a tie back to the monastic times. So there's a question as to whether or not in the East, in Eastern Catholic churches and in Eastern Orthodox churches, married men may be ordained priests. In both the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox or Eastern Catholic churches, married men may be ordained deacons. In the Roman Catholic Church, we maintain the discipline of celibacy, where celibate men are ordained to the priesthood. And if there is need for a married man to be ordained a priest, the Pope himself has to dispense and give that man permission to be ordained. So here's the thing. It is possible to ordain a married man. It is impossible for an ordained man to get married. That's the thing. So even if the law of the church changed tomorrow, I could not get married because I'm already ordained. But John could be ordained a priest because he is a married man. I could not, but so a deacon, a married man can be ordained a deacon, but a deacon, once ordained, can never marry. And so that's something that a lot of these men have to really think about when they are ordained, because if my wife should die before I do, the possibility of remarriage is not open for me any longer. That as an ordained man, I give myself fully to the church. And it's kind of weird to go dating as a cleric. I mean, just think about it. Do you want me out there doing that? No.
Aren't I already married to a priest?
She just does a lot of work. All right, so let's call it there. If you have other specific questions, again, we could go on and on, but I want to respect your time. And so we'll close with prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is our last theological night like this. We have one more coming up in April. That would be the Seder meal. And so if you've not done that before, I really encourage you to come to that. Dr. Lazarus is a convert from Judaism, and so he leads us in the Passover meal. And we do it on the week just before Easter so that we really understand what Jesus was celebrating on the night of the Last Supper and how that became the Eucharist. So that will be our next theology night, the Seder meal. Great. Good night.